I'm Hilmar. I'm one of the founders of Gelato. At Gelato, we do many things. We have projects launch their own rollups. Kraken, for example, you might have heard of their ink chain. They recently went live with us. And what we really try to offer to our users is like a holistic platform for their chain launches. So we do everything for them from account abstraction to providing them with oracles, providing them with VRF, all in like one also deployable sort of instance. And we support Arbitrum Orbit, OP Stack, ABC Stack, so most of the optimistic rollup frameworks right now. And yeah, that's it.
Cool. I'm Matt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Caldera. We are one of the first and one of the biggest rollup as a service platforms on Ethereum. We run a bunch of chains, about 30 chains on mainnet now, mostly OP Stack, ARB Stack, and the ZK Sync Stack, the ZK Stack. We also like to think of ourselves as an all-in-one platform, helping people deploy rollups from the early planning stages to the launch stage to running massive chains in production. We also recently announced, literally like an hour ago, our Metalayer. We released a small product demo, which is like a full stack interoperability framework that basically aggregates over all the top interoperability solutions with the goal of actually unifying Ethereum.
Awesome. And as for me, I'm a product manager at Polymer, and yeah, my whole focus is to remove messaging from interop. So this is going to be interesting. So I think in the last year we've come really far in terms of number of rollups and how the industry is growing. Between last year to now, how do you think your users or customers have perception of rollups changed basically?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we've been seeing over the past year, so of course, the biggest kind of macro trend is people are still looking to launch chains, right? Whether those are L1s or L2s, still we're expanding massively the number of chains, and I think platforms like both of ours are really helping with that. The biggest kind of secular trend we've seen has been a shift from general purpose chains to more quote unquote purpose built chains. So there was a time when there was a kind of meta where you could do a copy paste fork of Optimism or Arbitrum and try to make a play to be a general purpose chain, launch a token, right, run that growth playbook. What we've seen now, and I think this is really cool because it's basically the thesis of our company finally playing out, is that chains are going more specific, more purpose built. That might be app specific, for a specific game or social network or something. It could also just mean targeting a very specific community or a very specific use case, right? So obviously they are hosting this themselves, but Abstract is a good example. ApeChain is a good example of very consumer-focused ecosystems that are somewhere in between app-specific and general purpose. And I think the really cool thing we're seeing is just broadly more specialization.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the sort of the playbook of just I am another general purpose EVM and try to get rich is sort of over. You either they're two sort of chain customers really. There's one an application, they just need scale, they need a bit more sort of their own setup. I don't really think most of them actually need custom VMs or something. I think 99% are fine with EVM. They just don't need any other applications on their chain. They just kind of want to be isolated. They want to grow into it. And then there's the app customer, and then there really is this kind of I see them more like a sort of VC it's the ecosystem customer. I see them more like a fund. What Barachain does is they just raise a ton of money. They try to get a ton of capital in, and then they try to invest this into smaller projects that then launch on their platform, and they try to capture some of the value in the aggregate, so to say. And so these are the two playbooks that we see that make sense. And then maybe the third one, which I'm personally quite excited about, is that we have really heavyweights coming on chain. We have really big companies coming on chain that are bringing a whole new sort of wave of users. Base, of course, started that 2 years ago, something when they launched. Kraken now that launched on our platform. They are now really going all in. They're bringing in millions and millions of the users to on chain to their own rollup, and we are in talks with many other bigger companies, not only centralized exchanges. And so I think this will now come finally, and I'm pretty excited about that.
Awesome. Now that we know the customer side of things, maybe let's go deep down into what products you recommend to them, and in which use case maybe your favorite stack, if you're happy share it out loud.
Maybe question to you. I think most of our chains are both Arbitrum Orbit OP for now, I would guess. You said you support ZK Stack as well. When do you recommend maybe the ZK Stack to customers?
Yeah, I think the ZK stack versus optimistic, the kind of core difference there is like the actual fraud proof model, and we are seeing some teams be more opinionated on either side of that debate. What you kind of get out of a ZK stack is you get faster native interop, of course, right? Instead of needing to wait like a 7-day fault-proof window, you can run ZK proofs and have withdrawals within hours. So there are some teams that are really interested in that specifically. There are, of course, many teams interested in joining the ZK Sync Elastic Chain network as well. And there are like a lot of teams, especially ones we're seeing in more kind of traditional, like maybe finance or maybe more kind of security-focused types of applications that just like the idea of their chains being ZK provable rather than needing to rely on like game theory. And like I think, for what it's worth, optimistic rollups are quite good and secure. Like we haven't had a major hack yet as a space of an optimistic rollup. A lot of them are very battle tested, but a lot of teams just kind of vibes-wise, they'd rather have ZK than OP.
Yeah, I think what's important I think there's a huge like knowledge gap in the rollup space for a lot of customers. I think people oftentimes confuse like the rollup with a bridge, especially, right? Mm-hmm. Like at the end of the day, what people want is a chain. Like whether it's optimistic or ZK doesn't really matter. You just get a chain, you get a rollup. How do you inherit your security? Well, you use like a DA layer like Ethereum, like Celeste, for example, right? And then everyone can like spin up a node. They can verify that the state transition function of the inputs sort of results in certain outputs, and that's how you can prove that the chain is running correctly, right? You don't need ZK for this. You don't need optimistic fraud proofs for this, right? This is where like the bridge comes in. And I think bridge like goes into interoperability, of course, what you guys are also addressing. And I think the big trend that we are seeing in the market is that actually, if you look at Base, if you look at all the big chains that are launching, or like that have sort of gained some momentum, and also especially some smaller ones, many of them are actually not relying on that sort of canonical bridge that comes out of the box with the sort of frameworks they use. A lot of these assets are actually natively issued on the chain. They are maybe bridged in by third-party bridges, and they actually don't inherit any of the security of any sort of ZK canonical bridge or optimistic fraud-proof bridge that sort of these people get sold when they deploy their chain. And so that's why we are actually very bullish also on like new frameworks coming in that have a way more sort of modular outlook on how rollups actually should be built, like separating out the chain itself from the bridge and not like mashing them into like some weird sort of mix that is currently happening. But yeah, so I think that we will see more of that, I think, in the sort of future.
Yeah. Rollup is not the bridge, basically. I think that's something we can tweet out. Awesome. So we've seen this trend. There were like a bunch of teams which were like initially launching rollups, and now there is like, this trend coming back of like migrating from being a rollup to now an L1. We have so much tooling available. We have optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, and team like yours. And what do you think is like, compelling these teams to like move away from being a rollup?
Yeah, so there are definitely like a lot of examples of this. I'm curious, when you're thinking of this question, like what teams were you thinking about specifically?
I think most common examples are probably some like RWA teams like CampL2, Plume, Ondo.
Yeah, so I think there has been a little bit of a trend of teams that were at least considering like an L2 moving to an L1. We've actually seen the reverse as well. Like we just announced we're doing a ZK rollup with Xpla, which was a big Cosmos chain. Mostly focused on gaming in Korea, and they're moving to a ZK rollup, or they're launching an additional ZK rollup at least. So there are some kind of flows in both directions. I think broadly, when we've talked to teams and they've decided to go, who are considering an L2 and they've gone to an L1, one of the things that people do mention is this idea of like an L1 premium. I think a lot of people think that an L1 makes your tokenomics work better. My take personally is like, I think this is, it's not necessarily that an L1's tokenomics are better, it's that an L1's tokenomics are more convenient. Like when you're building a token, you're trying to basically say that, you're trying to make the case that like the token has utility, you can like make money using the token, maybe there's staking rewards, and the token has an element of like moneyness, which is what every L1 tries to argue, to varying levels of success. And like when you're an L1, you kind of get all of those things theoretically like for free. While rollups, the traditional model has been you launch a rollup, use ETH as the gas token. So ETH, you strengthen ETH's moneyness, but you don't strengthen your own token's moneyness. And then the tokens, historically have been kind of like dumber governance tokens. Dumber as in just less functionality, not necessarily a worse idea. I think this will pretty rapidly change. We're seeing a lot of rollups launch with their own token as the gas token. And the nice thing about rollups is like they're orders of magnitude less expensive to run, which means like unlike with an L1 where you kind of, even though you have clearer tokenomics, easier to understand maybe, you have worse tokenomics because you need to inflate the supply like crazy. For an L2, you don't need to do that. There's actually a really wide open field of like new ideas. You could introduce staking. You could introduce sequencer auctions, MEV auctions, et cetera. There's like a lot of cool things you can do with tokens. And so I think this narrative will start to change as more and more of those like things get built out and there's more experimentation done and people figure out how to do L2 tokenomics in like a really, really viable way. But I do think, so generally I think the shift from some teams moving to L1s is more just, again, for the convenience of having simple tokenomics.
Yeah, I think 99% of all L1s will pivot to rollups. So, and I don't look at L1s versus L2s. I look at like you have your own dedicated validator set, which we sort of define as L1, and rollups, right? It doesn't matter if like we're still in this phase where we talk about L2s, L3s, L4s, but this will also end. It will just be rollups and non-rollups. And for 99% of the project, it doesn't make sense to launch an L1. Like you don't get better censorship-resistant properties that you will get from Ethereum or Celestia or whatnot, right? And if that's not the case, then I don't think you will get better security either from like a crypto economic standpoint. And then like, okay, why do you do it? Like then it's literally just like narrative. So there's no benefit. Actually, just higher cost. Everything is worse. High maintenance, more coordination. You waste significantly more time. I think we never saw a rollup going from a rollup to an L1, but we've seen a ton of L1s going to rollups. And so all the projects that now think they will launch as L1s, 5 years down the line, they will call us up and say like, hey guys, can we somehow become a rollup again? So I think this is just like a temporary thing. I think the future will be you have like a couple of these sort of DA platforms, and then you just have like rollups that are using it.
Awesome. So I think going back to like the announcement Caldera made like a few hours ago, and different rollups also building their own interop solution. How do you think about these different clusters spanning out, and maybe will Gelato basically make their own interop solution as well?
Yeah. So our view is like interop, people just talk about interop like it's like one kind of big homogeneous category. Really like interop is everything from like base layer kind of message passing and or that native rollup bridge, right? Like settlement, right, and finality, all the way to like the user interfaces that like a user clicks on the widget when you say I want to bridge this token to here, et cetera. For us, like our view basically is that a lot of that kind of bottom layer stuff, it's being solved by really great players in this space. And there are actually many different layers with different security trade-offs that exist right now. Right? You do have the native rollup interop like going to Ethereum, right, which is probably kind of the most secure interop solution you have. Then you have clusters, which I think you alluded to, right? The superchain, elastic chain, Arbitrum's, right, interop solution that offer really tightly integrated interop for specific stacks. And then you have like more kind of general message passing services. And then you have everything else on top, Intents, the UI layer, the SDK layer, et cetera. Our position, as a company broadly has always been to like use the best tech where available, like never reinvent the wheel, and focus on the areas where we can provide a lot of value. So we're really focused on, aggregating over the best teams in the space. Hyperlane, Eco, Relay, and Across are ones we just mentioned. In our announcement, there are many others. Of course, as well, we work with those native solutions, right? Elastic Chain, Superchain, et cetera, and basically providing all the utilities to make it easier for you as a user or a developer to like actually like use kind of all of those things and use the best solutions at once. So we're very kind of focused on like that like last mile and just making it really easy for people to just do what they want to do on chain.
Yeah, agree with that. Like we're doing the same thing basically, just like using the best technologies like Hyperlane, Succinct, ZK, and basically making it as easy as possible for chains that deploy their own rollup, for projects that deploy their own rollups to have users just one click on board to the chain and then one click go to any other chain by just like aggregating over it. I think that's sort of like where everything is consolidating to, and I think interop is sort of will be solved by, like, is already solved. Like we need a bit more standardization with like message passing and so forth, but I think we're seeing like a lot of adoption, for example, by Hyperlane, which I think is great to see. I think their system of like permissionless deploys and like message passing, and everyone can just like, we can just deploy and run these things ourselves as a RaaS provider is amazing. So shout out to them. And then as soon as I think ZK becomes more production ready, which won't happen in the next 6 to 12 months, but like over maybe like the next sort of 2 to 3 years, in my opinion, I think then we will have like decent sort of like interop, and then there's a lot of like UI label components that you need to solve. And I think the stacks just need to become more modular. I think a lot of these stacks right now, they actually made it worse, not better, because they sort of enshrined messaging and they enshrined a certain bridge in a proving system that is then not interoperable between these clusters, right? And so I think what we will see is we will see way more modular rollup designs that are way more unopinionated and don't enshrine their own sort of way of doing things, and be way more a general purpose and interoperable. And this is, for example, what we are building with Abundance and ABC right now. This is kind of like our focus on, hey, let's not enshrine any messaging, let's not enshrine any opinionated bridging protocol. We just let the developers choose for themselves to use, I don't know, Hyperlane with like ZK, for example, and then go with it. Or if they want to use layer 0 with somebody that has said they use layer 0, right? So.
Got it. Have you guys seen much interest in, base rollups or native rollups? I guess there's always been a trend in Ethereum to maybe sometimes complicate things. Earlier we had optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, and now we are like adding flavors to it. While on the other side, as a developer, I might be just, inclined to launch on Solana, where like everything is just one. So do you think we are just creating more overchoice?
Yeah. So I think you always have to look at the incentives, and like if I'm a builder and I'm launching an application, I might want to launch a chain, right? Because I have the resources for it, and I think like long term I need the capacity and so forth. And then you have to think, okay, I want to accrue value of the chain as the application, and we just have to now accept that applications will capture the value. Okay, let's just accept that. This is just how it will work out, right? And then the question is, okay, why? What is my incentive as a project that aims to capture a lot of value from what I'm building to potentially forego a lot of this value to another base layer and not capture it myself? Why would I do it? Am I a rational actor or am I an altruistic actor? And maybe there are some altruistic actors that want to do it, right? Maybe you get pitched synchronous composability between all native rollup chains on Ethereum at some distant future point in time, and you think it's super valuable that you want to give up so like a lot of the revenue that you're generating. But yeah, I think these things will not pick up. I don't think they will see great adoption if the incentive problem is not solved. If Ethereum now comes around the corner and says, you know what, we will pay for 100 native rollups on Ethereum, we will pay the proving cost, we will pay for all of this with like emissions, then of course, like developers will flock in, they will use the free infrastructure, they're like, great, this is actually what Ethereum should be doing in order to like try to avoid the innovator's dilemma that they are now currently facing. But if these incentives are not solved, if people are not incentivized to use them, then I personally don't see the incentives for them.
Yeah, I know this is a debate, so I wish I could disagree, but I do agree. I think like, yeah, broadly, it either needs to be explicit incentives, implicit incentives, like, if this whole idea of like the EF going founder mode and marketing mode, becomes like a thing, maybe, the EF can use that to convince some people to do more kind of native or enshrined rollups, which is not like a totally crazy thought, because candidly, a lot of these infrastructure choices are like, they're very sticky. Like once you choose to do something, you're kind of locked in unless you're willing to make like a massive infrastructure pivot. So there is opportunity for someone who's pushing like, base rollups to really kind of get in on the ground floor with some high potential projects and hope that, they can carry those projects to becoming big. Or, the community needs to start caring about it a lot more, which I think candidly is very unlikely. From like a technical perspective as well, as Hilmar mentioned, like we're seeing assets where, candidly, like the settlement process for those assets is not the weakest link, right? If you're doing like an omni-chain token, or even you have a token that is like on Ethereum mainnet, but there is just so much locked up in kind of multi-sig bridges all over the place, like you're not going to be concerned about whether or not your rollup is enshrined, because honestly, that's not like where the biggest security risk is. So again, for that reason, like I'm not super bullish on like organically people trying to like pushing the space in that direction.
Great. It was great, discussing all these topics with you. I hope we have like a bright future for rollups. It seems like a lot of incentives and alignment is still required.
Oh yeah.
Well, I guess I think on that front as well, like one thing to say is like, some people are thinking about this, like when people talk about alignment, it's from like the perspective of like, oh no, my ETH bags aren't going up, right? Like actually like a lot of great technologies leak a ton of value. And allow other really valuable technologies to be built on top of them. And so I don't necessarily think it's totally bad that every rollup that's being launched on Ethereum isn't like aligned, right? Like if people are building great businesses on Ethereum that have some alignment but not full alignment, I think that's like, at the very least, a partial win for the ecosystem.
Ethereum will fail if it tries to extract value from rollups.
Yeah.
Like you need to make rollups value. You need to create value for rollups. If you try to extract it, now that the pie is so small, if you try to extract all the value of this small pie, then someone else will come around, they will say, hey, we give it all away, and it will grow 100 times as big as Ethereum. So Ethereum really needs to like change their mindset, and they need to go into growth mode again.
Awesome. I guess we are like up with time, but yeah, it was great, sharing this time with you guys.
Cool.
Thanks.